The last rule that we will discuss in this course, and the last one particularly related to the principle of power, is Rule 10. Avoid a series of similar sentence structures. The last rule we will discuss is sentence variety. The overuse of any particular sentence pattern is to be avoided, particularly compound sentences or sentences with non-restrictive adjective clauses mentioned after the main clause. A lack of sentence variety leads to monotonous and tedious writing. So what is a clause? Because if we talk about sentence variety, then we're talking about different types of clauses which make up different types of sentences. So a clause is a group of words with a subject and predicate. A subject is a noun that functions as the doer of the action, while the predicate is the main verb of a sentence along with its object or complement where appropriate. So we have three basic types of predicates. The first type is the verb only. For example, the patient is recovering. So is recovering is the predicate, and it's the present continuous form of the verb. So therefore it has two parts, the verb to be, in this case is, and the present participle verb, or the ing form of the verb, recovering. The second type of predicate is verb plus object. I read the obituaries every day. So here, the predicate is read plus the object, the thing that's being read, the obituaries. And the third type of predicate is verb plus complement. My eyes are watery. So the complement here is watery, and it is completing the meaning of the sentence. The verb, of course, is are. Okay, and with complements, they often serve as descriptions of the subject. So in this case, the subject is eyes, and watery is a word that describes eyes. So we have two types of clauses. There are clauses that are independent and clauses that are dependent. An independent clause expresses a complete thought. For example, John is a student. So you as a listener, you're not expecting or requiring anything else to complete this meaning or this sentence. On the other hand, a dependent clause does not express complete thought. If you do your homework, all right, so this is a conditional clause, and you're waiting for the response, right? So if you do your homework, then what? What will happen as a result of that? Now, with these different types of clauses in mind, let's look at three types of sentences, all right? We have simple sentences, compound sentences, and complex. Let's start off with a simple sentence. Okay, so we know what an independent clause is. Well, a simple sentence is basically one independent clause. John is a student. A compound sentence, on the other hand, is two or more independent clauses. And there are, in fact, four types of compound sentences. The first type of compound sentence is where the two independent clauses are combined using a comma plus fanboys. And fanboys is an acronym that stands for the conjunctions for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. For example, his pressure is okay, comma, and he has a normal sinus rhythm. The second type of compound sentence is where we use a colon. The research is conclusive. Climate change is a reality. And often we use a colon to combine independent clauses when the second independent clause explains or gives more details regarding the first independent clause. A third type of compound sentence is where we have a semicolon. For example, we can go to the museum to do some research. Semicolon. Mondays are pretty quiet there. Normally, the first letter after the semicolon is lowercase. Of course, in this sentence, it's uppercase simply because it happens to be a proper noun. Otherwise, it would have been lowercase. Now, semicolon, it shouldn't be used by itself, of course. It shouldn't be used too much, because what a semicolon says is that there is a relationship between the two independent clauses, but it does not specify the nature of that relationship. So when you use a semicolon by itself, you're relying on the reader to figure out what that relationship is. Okay? So obviously, if you fill your essays and paragraphs with semicolons alone, you're going to make the job of the reader that much more difficult, right? Because they'll have to, come to a reasonable conclusion as to what or how these two independent clauses are related. And therefore, this brings us to the third or the fourth type of compound sentence, and that is where we have the semicolon plus a conjunctive adverb. Okay, so the issue with the semicolon alone is that the relationship isn't clear. So with this fourth type of compound sentence, we clarify that relationship using that conjunctive adverb. And there are a list of them. I don't intend to provide that list now. I will, in fact, that list is provided in Rule 3 when we discussed linking words. All right. But for now, we'll suffice with one example. You need to attend class regularly, semicolon. Otherwise, you won't be ready for the test. And finally, the third type of sentence is a complex sentence. A complex sentence is a sentence in which you have one or more independent clauses and one or more dependent clauses. For example, if you do your homework, you'll get a better grade. And we're not going to get into the details now, but there are different types of complex sentences because there are different types of dependent clauses. You have adjective clauses, adverb clauses, and several other types of clauses. Now, using our understanding of clauses and sentence types, let's examine rhetorical variety, namely period and loose sentences. So what we were looking at before was differences in sentences in terms of their grammatical structure. In other words, in terms of the number and type of clauses that they have. But now we're looking at the difference in sentences in terms of their meaning, okay, or their rhetorical effect. So the first type is what's called a periodic sentence, which is basically a sentence where the complete meaning is given only at the end of the sentence. For example, after visiting my father, I returned home. Okay, so this is a periodic sentence because the reader won't get the full sense of the meaning until they read and up to and including the last word of the sentence, basically, right? They have to read the entire sentence and then they can understand what the complete meaning is. Now, had we reversed this and said, I returned home after visiting my father, that wouldn't be a periodic sentence because you could you could pause after I return home, and it would express a complete thought. And the second type of sentence is a loose sentence, which is a sentence where a complete meaning is given before the end. For example, I visited my father, comma, and then I returned home. So you'll notice that complex sentences where the dependent clause precedes the independent clause produce periodic sentences, while compound sentences produce loose sentences. And this is clear from the two examples that I gave. So here in a loose sentence, we have a complex sentence where the independent clause rather than the dependent clause begins the sentence. On the other hand, in the period or the periodic sentence, the dependent clause comes first. So let's read both of them. Let's start with the loose sentence. The author's strength is in reasoning and emotions, more than in description, even though her descriptions are admirable. Now compare that with the following. Even though the author's descriptions are admirable, her strength is not in description, but in reasoning and sentiment. The same can be observed here. Remember, we're not saying that one rhetorical style is better than another. What we're saying is that you should avoid a succession of loose or period sentences. Rather, what you should do is you should have both types of sentences. All right, let's read both examples now. The accused accepted a plea bargain as he feared he wouldn't receive a fair trial because public sentiment was largely xenophobic. And the periodic sentence, with public sentiment largely xenophobic and fearing the lack of a fair trial, the accused accepted a plea bargain. All right, so to bring variety to your writing, I would like to demonstrate 4 basic techniques, okay? So I just labeled them here, but I'll explain them shortly. You have simple sentences, semicolon and colon, periodic sentence with 2 clauses, 3-clause sentence. If you notice that your writing has too many compound sentences, you may choose to revise them by breaking them down into multiple simple sentences. Naturally, if your paper suffers from too many simple sentences, you could just as easily combine the sentences to create a compound sentence or multiple compound sentences. Just remember to use the right conjunction if you do so. All right, so let's take a look at the sentence to the left, the compound sentence. The research findings suggest that patients lacked adequate educational resources and that more needs to be done by the public sector to facilitate the spread of information. All right, so if we were to combine this into a simple sentence, we would say, or into multiple simple sentences, according to the research, patients lacked adequate educational resources. In addition, to facilitate the spread of information, more needs to be done by the public sector. A lot of students don't know this, but independent clauses can also be joined by just a semicolon. And like I said before, a semicolon is fine, but you don't want to overuse it because the relationship is not explicitly stated and it's inferred by the reader. All right, so that's fine if it's a clear relationship, right? But if the relationship between the 2 clauses is not clear, you do want to specify by using some sort of conjunction. So let's start with the sentence that has a conjunction, and then we're going to rewrite it with just the semicolon. Teachers who use social media to communicate school-related information to their students may experience higher response rates as many students prefer using social media over other means. Teachers who use social media to communicate school-related information to their students may experience higher response rates. Many students prefer using social media over other means. Oftentimes, academic writing suffers from a succession of loose sentences, as we have here. Now, to fix this, we can simply switch the position of the clauses and thereby create a periodic sentence. Teachers who use social media to communicate school-related information to their students may experience higher response rates, as many students prefer using social media over other means. As many students prefer using social media over other means, teachers who use social media to communicate school-related information to their students may experience higher response rates. We may also combine simple sentences to create a three-clause sentence or a compound complex sentence, as we see here. So let's start with the simple sentences. According to the research, patients lacked adequate educational resources. In addition, to facilitate the spread of information, more needs to be done by the public sector. The research showed that patients lacked adequate educational resources, and there was a lack of public sector support to facilitate the spread of information. All right, now let's take a look at this passage where we have multiple techniques being used to bring more color and variety to an otherwise boring text. So let's start with the first set of sentences, which obviously lack variety and are very boring. I went to the library in the afternoon. I took out a book that was on the reading list. Then I went home to eat dinner. I did not open the book until after dinner. Then I found that it was the wrong edition. I was really frustrated. I should have checked before I took it out. Now with variety. In the afternoon, I went to the library to take out a book on the reading list. Then, carrying my book, I went home for dinner. Skimming the book after dinner, I was really frustrated. It was the wrong edition. I should have checked before taking it out.